Deep in the Amazon, the jungle was alive. It whispered with the rustling of unseen creatures, breathed with the slow rise of mist curling through ancient trees, and watched with unseen eyes. Dr. Ethan Cole adjusted his backpack, sweat already soaking through his shirt despite the early hour. He was leading a small team of researchers deep into the Amazon, following the path of an uncontacted tribe known as the Karoo. The tribe was a mystery, rumored to be one of the oldest in the region, untouched by the modern world. But the deeper the team ventured, the more they felt watched. "We should set up camp before sunset," said Maria Vasquez, the group's anthropologist. She wiped her forehead, glancing at the shadows stretching long across the jungle floor. "The locals we spoke to in the last village warned us about traveling after dark. Because of the spirits?" joked James Turner, their cameraman. He had been filming since they set foot in the jungle, capturing every moment for their documentary. "Because of the hunters," Maria corrected, her tone flat. "They believe the jungle is home to spirits that hunt the living. If they see you at night, they follow. And once they choose you, they never stop." Silence settled over the group. Only the sounds of the jungle filled the air. The distant cry of a monkey, the constant hum of insects, the faint rustling of leaves from something unseen. "Superstition," Ethan said, forcing a smile. "But we'll make camp soon just in case." As the sun dipped below the treetops, they set up their tents near a small clearing. A fire crackled in the center, casting flickering light against the looming jungle. Turner continued filming, panning his camera across the darkness beyond their camp. "Still feels like we're being watched," he muttered. Maria sat beside Ethan, her expression tense. "The stories say the hunters don't have faces. They're shadows that move through the trees, always just out of sight. If you hear them whisper your name, it's already too late." "Great bedtime story," Turner scoffed. But as the night deepened, the jungle grew eerily quiet. No insects, no birds, just silence. Then, from the darkness beyond the firelight, came a whisper, a voice, faint and inhuman, calling Ethan's name. The whisper slithered through the trees, barely more than a breath, yet unmistakable. "Ethan." His blood ran cold. He turned sharply toward the darkness beyond the firelight, but there was nothing, only trees and shadows. The rest of the team went rigid, their eyes scanning the jungle. "Did you hear that?" Maria whispered. "Yeah," Turner said, his voice strained. "Tell me you got that on tape." Turner checked his camera, rewinding the footage. They huddled close as the playback began. Jungle sounds, the crackle of the fire, then static. A thick, suffocating burst of white noise. And just before the static took over, a whisper. "Ethan." It was barely audible, but it was there. "Jesus," Turner muttered. "That wasn't one of us." Ethan swallowed hard, trying to steady his breath. "Probably just the wind." Maria shook her head. "The wind doesn't say names." The jungle remained unervingly silent, as if holding its breath. Then, from somewhere deep in the trees, they heard the crunch of leaves. Footsteps, slow, deliberate. Turner grabbed his camera and pointed it toward the sound, but the second he focused, the footsteps stopped. "Whatever it is," Maria whispered, "it's watching us." They barely slept that night. Ethan lay in his tent, his hand gripping a machete, listening to the jungle breathe around them. Several times, he thought he heard faint whispers weaving through the trees, but when he strained to listen, they were gone. By dawn, the sounds of the jungle returned. Birds, insects, the distant cries of howler monkeys. But something had changed. They found footprints circling their camp. Bare, human-like prints, but impossibly large with elongated toes. Maria knelt beside them, her face pale. "These aren't from the Karoo." Turner took photos. "Then what the hell made them?" No one had an answer. Ethan took a deep breath. "We keep moving. Stay alert." As they packed up, Maria hesitated. "We should turn back. The locals warned us." Ethan met her gaze. "We came here for answers. We're not leaving yet." Maria didn't argue, but the fear in her eyes lingered. They continued deeper into the jungle. The further they went, the stronger the feeling of being watched became. Shadows moved at the edge of their vision, slipping through the trees too fast to be human. Turner whispered, "Tell me you saw that." Ethan had. A shape, tall, thin, barely more than a silhouette, yet undeniably real. Then the whisper came again. "Ethan." And this time it was closer. The whisper crawled under Ethan's skin, a breathy, unnatural sound that felt more like a thought forced into his mind than something truly spoken. Maria grabbed his arm. "Ethan, we need to turn back. Now." He wanted to listen. Every instinct screamed at him to run. But something deeper, some twisted sense of duty or foolish curiosity, kept him moving forward. "We came to find the Karoo," he said, voice tight. "We're close. I can feel it." "Yeah," Turner muttered. "You know what else is close?" He pointed toward the trees. Whatever the hell that thing was. The jungle swallowed their voices. It felt wrong, too dense, too alive, yet eerily silent at the same time. The deeper they went, the more the sunlight struggled to pierce through the canopy, until the world around them was dim, almost twilight. Then they saw the carvings. Deep gouges in tree trunks, spiraling symbols that looked ancient, as if they had been burned into the wood. Some resembled eyes. Others looked like jagged mouths. "Tribal markings?" Turner asked, lifting his camera. Maria ran her fingers over one of the symbols. "No, this isn't Karoo. This is something else." Ethan barely heard them. He was staring into the trees, where a shape moved in the darkness. The figure, it was wrong. Tall, impossibly thin, its limbs elongated beyond human proportions. Its skin was dark, blending with the shadows, and its face, or lack of one, was nothing but smooth, stretched skin where eyes and a mouth should have been. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. The creature tilted its head. Then it took a step forward. Turner swore under his breath. "We're leaving, right now." Maria grabbed Ethan's wrist and yanked him backward. The creature didn't follow, but it watched. They could feel it watching. They turned and ran. Branches whipped against their faces. Roots clawed at their feet. The jungle blurred around them, but the whisper followed. "Ethan." It was everywhere. Inside his skull, beneath his skin. Then the ground disappeared beneath him. He fell, sliding, tumbling, crashing through vines and earth until he landed with a bone-rattling thud in darkness. "Ethan." Maria's voice was distant, above him. Pain shot through his ribs as he tried to move. The air was thick, heavy, and then he realized he was in a pit, a deep one, and he wasn't alone. Bones surrounded him. Human skulls, ribs, shattered femurs, hundreds of them. Some were ancient, others frighteningly fresh. A sound. Not a whisper this time. Breathing. He turned slowly. In the darkness, something breathed. And then it moved. The breathing was slow, deliberate, like something waiting, studying him. Ethan's heart pounded as he reached for his flashlight, his fingers trembling. He clicked it on, the beam slicing through the suffocating darkness. And then he saw it. A face, if it could even be called that, stared back at him. Smooth skin, stretched tight over an elongated skull, with no eyes, no nose. Just a hint of an indented mouth that didn't quite open. It was crouched among the bones, impossibly still, its thin limbs folded like a predatory insect waiting to strike. Ethan's breath hitched. His mind screamed at him to move, but his body refused to obey. Then it twitched, a single, jerky movement as if testing him. Above, Maria's voice. "Ethan, are you okay?" The thing's head snapped upward at the sound. It didn't look. It had no eyes, but it listened. Ethan seized his chance. He scrambled to his feet, ignoring the searing pain in his ribs, and lunged for the pit's edge. His fingers clawed at the damp earth, feet kicking against loose bones. The creature moved. Not a step, not a lunge. It shifted, a sudden unnatural glide, covering distance too fast. Ethan felt it behind him, close. Hands reached down, Maria and Turner. They grabbed his arms, hauling him upward just as something cold skimmed his ankle. Then he was out, They collapsed into the dirt, panting. What the hell was that? Turner wheezed. Ethan couldn't answer. He looked back at the pit, shining his flashlight inside. It was empty. The bones were still there, but the creature was gone. A whisper drifted up from the darkness. Ethan! They ran. Branches tore at them. The jungle a suffocating maze of shadows and twisting roots. But something was wrong. The jungle was different now. Taller, the trees warped, the path they had taken gone. Maria clutched her pendant, whispering prayers in Spanish. "We're not in the same place," she panted. "The jungle. It moved." Turner checked his GPS. "This thing's useless. We should have hit the river an hour ago." "We're being led somewhere," Maria whispered. Ethan knew she was right. Then, up ahead, torches flickered between the trees. Figures emerged, human but barely. Their bodies were painted in black and red, their eyes hollow, their movements eerily synchronized. The Karoo. They weren't surprised to see them. They had been waiting, and behind them, towering in the shadows, the faceless creatures stood, watching. Ethan realized, with bone-deep dread, they had never been the hunters. They had always been the prey. The Karoo warriors stood motionless, their hollow eyes reflecting the torchlight. Behind them, the faceless creatures loomed, half hidden in the shadows, their elongated bodies unnaturally still. Ethan's breath came in short gasps. His mind screamed for him to run, but there was nowhere to go. The jungle had closed in around them, twisting the landscape into something unfamiliar, something wrong. One of the Karoo stepped forward. His face was painted in streaks of red and black, his eyes sunken. He raised a hand, and the others immediately bowed their heads. He spoke in a low, rhythmic voice, words Ethan didn't understand. Maria, still clutching her pendant, whispered, "He's not speaking any known indigenous language." The warrior's eyes locked onto Ethan. "You brought them," he said. The words were thick with an ancient accent, but unmistakably in English. Ethan's blood ran cold. "Brought who?" The warrior pointed toward the faceless figures standing in the darkness. "Them." A hush fell over the jungle. The creatures remained still, but Ethan felt their presence pressing against him like an unseen weight. We didn't bring them," Maria stammered. "They've been following us." The warrior shook his head. "No, they were sleeping." His gaze darkened. "Until you spoke their names. Until you stepped into their hunting ground." Turner gripped his camera, hands shaking. "This is insane. We're leaving." The Karoo warrior's expression didn't change. "No one leaves." Ethan's stomach twisted. "There has to be a way." "The jungle has chosen you," the warrior interrupted. "You are marked. They will never stop." The faceless creatures shifted. Not a step, not a sound, just a slow, unnatural tilt of their heads. Then the whispers started again. "Ethan, Maria, James." Turner recoiled. "They know our names." Maria was shaking. "No, no, no. That means they've already claimed us." The warrior turned his back on them. "The only way to end the hunt is with blood." Ethan's throat went dry. "Whose blood?" The warrior gestured to the bones at their feet. "The ones before you tried to run. Their screams still haunt this place." His expression darkened. "You have only one choice. A sacrifice must be made." A deep, guttural sound rumbled from the jungle. A growl, low, hungry, ancient. The creatures were moving now, slowly, closing in. Maria whispered, "We have to do something." Turner's voice cracked. "What if we're the sacrifice?" Ethan clenched his fists. They weren't going to die here. Not like this. He looked at the Karoo warrior. "What kind of sacrifice?" The warrior's eyes locked onto his, and he smiled. The Karoo warrior's smile was slow, knowing. "You must give them someone," he said. Ethan felt Turner stiffen beside him. "You mean one of us?" The whispers slithered through the air. "Ethan, Maria, James." Maria shook her head, stepping back. "No, we're not playing this game." The warrior didn't argue. He only stepped aside, gesturing to the faceless creatures waiting in the dark. "You refuse." The whispers stopped. The jungle held its breath. Then movement. The creatures surged forward. Not running, not lunging, just gliding, closing the distance without sound, without effort. Maria screamed. Turner shoved Ethan back. Run! They bolted. The jungle twisted around them, vines clawing at their arms, the ground shifting beneath their feet. The torches of the Karoo flickered and vanished behind them, swallowed by the suffocating darkness. But the creatures were faster. Ethan barely saw them. Only flickers of movement in his periphery, shadows warping, twisting, appearing where they shouldn't be. The jungle itself seemed to bend to their will. Turner was ahead, panting, stumbling. Come on! Then he stopped, dead in his tracks. Ethan almost crashed into him. What? Then he saw why. The path had ended. A sheer drop, a black void stretching below. A canyon too wide to jump, too deep to survive. Maria skidded to a stop behind them. Shit! The whispers came again. Ethan, Maria, James. Ethan turned. The creatures stood at the tree line, just beyond the reach of his flashlight. Unmoving, watching, waiting. Turner looked at Ethan. His face was pale, sweat dripping down his forehead. His eyes darted between Ethan, Maria, and the faceless things in the trees. A terrible realization settled over them all at the same time. Maria whispered, "They're waiting for a sacrifice." Ethan's stomach clenched. "We're not." Turner moved, fast, a blur of motion. Ethan barely had time to react before Turner shoved him aside, before his hands shot out, grabbing Maria by the arm. Maria screamed. Ethan lunged, but it was too late. Turner threw her, straight into the creatures. The jungle exploded with movement. The faceless things swarmed Maria in a single, horrifying instant. Her scream was cut off, choked, drowned in the sickening crunch of bones snapping, flesh tearing. Then silence. The whispers stopped. The creatures vanished. Turner was shaking, his chest heaving. His voice cracked. "I had to. It was her or us." Ethan stared at him. Something inside him snapped. Without thinking, without hesitation, he lunged. His fist connected with Turner's jaw. A sickening crack. Turner stumbled, eyes wide, and then he lost his footing. Ethan saw the moment he realized. The way his face twisted in sheer, gut-wrenching terror. Then he was gone, falling. The canyon swallowed him whole. Ethan didn't hear him hit the ground. Didn't hear anything but the pounding of his own heart. Then, the jungle exhaled. The trees straightened. The path returned. And the whispers were gone. Ethan stood there for a long time. Then, slowly he turned and walked away, alone. Ethan stumbled through the jungle, his body running on instinct. His mind felt empty, hollow. A cavern of echoes where Maria's screams still lingered. By the time he reached the river, the sun was rising. The jungle felt different now, lighter. The oppressive weight of unseen eyes had lifted, the whispers gone. He collapsed at the water's edge, his hands trembling. His reflection stared back at him, haunted eyes, blood smeared across his face. He had survived, but at what cost? A rustling in the trees made him jolt upright. His breath caught in his throat. For a moment he thought it was them, but it was just a man, a villager, standing at the riverbank, watching him with cautious eyes. Behind him, a small wooden boat bobbed in the water. "You are alive," the man said. Ethan swallowed hard. His voice was raw when he spoke. "I need to get out." The villager studied him. "Did you see them?" Ethan didn't answer. He didn't have to. The man nodded grimly and gestured to the boat. As Ethan climbed in, he felt the jungle watching him one last time. The boat drifted downriver, away from the nightmare, away from the whispers, but deep in the Amazon, beneath the endless canopy of green. The hunt was already beginning again, and somewhere, in the shadows, the faceless things whispered a new name. The ancestors of the hunted. Long ago, when the Amazon was untouched by human hands and the jungle teemed with life, there existed a civilization that knew all the secrets of the land. They called themselves the Talyahai, And they were more than just a tribe. They were the guardians of the balance between the world of men and the dark, hidden corners of the forest. But something happened, something that would change their fate forever. Legends tell that when the Talyahai first arrived in the Amazon, they were embraced by nature. They learned to understand the language of the forest, to respect its powers, and to live in harmony with those who dwelled within its depths. But with the arrival of the first outsiders, when Europe first sent ships to the shores of South America, something unimaginable occurred. The tribe discovered an ancient cave, covered in strange symbols and images. These drawings depicted creatures with human features but bodies that did not belong to any living being on Earth. These were the hunters. They were not human. They were not animal. They were something else, beings that lived in the shadows. The Talyahai discovered that these creatures had existed since the dawn of time. They were not merely a part of the jungle. They were its essence, the embodiment of its darkness. When humans tried to disrupt the balance or venture too far into the depths, they became the prey of these beings. But it was not murder for sustenance. It was worship. The hunters took the souls and blood of those who dared to break the forest's rules. The Talyahai, realizing they might become victims of these creatures, attempted to strike a deal. They built shrines, laid the bones of their ancestors on altars, and offered their own sacrifices to appease the hunters. But with each passing year, the creatures became more demanding. Legend says that one night, in the deep darkness, they took the strongest leader of the Talyahai, and from that moment on, the tribe was doomed to live in fear. The Talyahai tried to forget, to hide from these creatures, but the shadow of the hunters would never leave them. And as the centuries passed, the jungle whispered its secrets to the winds, telling of the price that had to be paid for disturbing the ancient balance. As the Talyahai tribe's fear grew, their once thriving civilization began to wither. The jungle, once their protector, became an ever-present, ominous force. The more they offered sacrifices, the more the hunters demanded. What began as a pact to preserve balance had turned into a relentless, insatiable hunger. The creatures grew bolder, taking more than they were offered. They no longer confined themselves to the shadows but ventured into the very heart of Talyahai villages. They no longer simply killed for sustenance, they hunted for sport, for vengeance. The jungle had grown thick with their presence, and the Talyahai soon realized they were surrounded, trapped within their own domain. In their desperation, the Talyahai elders sought a deeper understanding of the hunters. They journeyed into the deepest parts of the jungle, where no human had dared to tread. There, they uncovered an ancient truth that had been long forgotten. The hunters were not born of nature, but of something far older, something that existed before the first tree had sprouted, before the first river had flowed. The hunters were born of darkness, entities that had existed since the dawn of time. They were not creatures of flesh and blood, but beings of pure energy and malevolence, bound to the land by ancient forces beyond human comprehension. They had once been worshipped as gods by an ancient, forgotten civilization that had vanished long before the Talyahai arrived. In exchange for their worship, the hunters had promised protection and prosperity. But as time passed, the balance had shifted. The worshippers had been consumed, their blood and souls used to strengthen the dark forces that created the hunters. And now, the Talyahai, unwittingly descendants of those first worshippers, were paying the price for that forgotten pact. The elders understood that the only way to end the cycle of death was to sever the connection between the hunters and the land. But the cost would be unimaginable. The jungle had grown too strong, its roots intertwined with the very essence of the hunters. To break the bond would mean not only banishing the creatures but destroying the jungle itself, the heart of the world they had lived in for centuries. Faced with this impossible choice, the elders decided that their fate, and the fate of their people, would be sealed by one final sacrifice. They would offer themselves, all of the elders, as a final tribute, hoping their souls would be enough to sever the connection between the jungle and the hunters. But the hunters had anticipated this. They knew that the Talyahai's desperation would lead them to this point. And so, in the darkest of nights, the sacrifice was made. The elders stepped into the depths of the jungle, calling upon the ancient powers that had bound the land to the darkness. The jungle trembled, the sky darkened, and the earth itself seemed to cry out as the elders were consumed by the very forces they sought to banish. In the end, the Talyahai tribe was no more. Their village was abandoned, their people scattered, lost to the jungle. The connection between the hunters and the land was not severed as the elders had hoped. Instead, the sacrifice only served to strengthen the bond, ensuring that the creatures would continue their hunt, their whispers, and their hunger. And so, the jungle of the Amazon remained, a place of beauty and terror. The creatures, the hunters, still lurked in its depths, waiting for the next souls foolish enough to trespass. The ancient pact had not been broken. The cycle of death continued. The Talyahai were gone, but the hunters, they were eternal. Centuries passed, and the Amazon jungle slowly reclaimed the remnants of the Talyahai civilization. The once flourishing villages crumbled into nothing more than forgotten ruins, lost beneath layers of creeping vines and the relentless, ever-growing trees. But the jungle never forgot. The land held the memory of the old pact, of the sacrifice that had failed to break the curse. The hunters, eternal and undying, continued their vigil. Generations of explorers, scientists, and adventurers ventured into the jungle in search of the Talyahai's lost city, drawn by whispers of treasure, of ancient knowledge, of an untouched world that had hidden away from time. But none ever returned. Some vanished without a trace, their expeditions never heard from again. Others came back, changed, broken, or driven mad by the things they saw. The jungle had become a labyrinth of fear and mystery, a place where the lines between the real and the supernatural blurred. It wasn't until the early 21st century that a new group of researchers set out to uncover the lost history of the Talyahai. Driven not by greed, but by a thirst for knowledge. Their mission was clear: find the Talyahai ruins, piece together the lost language, and understand the truth behind the jungle's curse. They had no idea what awaited them in the depths of the Amazon. The team was led by Dr. Ethan Callaway, an anthropologist with a deep interest in the ancient civilizations of South America. His colleagues included Maria Rojas, an archaeologist who had spent years researching indigenous tribes, and James Turner, a photographer known for capturing the most elusive and dangerous creatures of the wild. They began their expedition with optimism, unaware of the ancient forces that had shaped the jungle into a place of nightmares. The new hunt begins. The researchers traveled deep into the heart of the Amazon, trekking through dense undergrowth, their path illuminated only by the dim glow of lanterns. They followed a set of coordinates found in a long-forgotten manuscript that claimed to be a map to the ruins of the Talyahai civilization. The manuscript had been passed down from one scholar to the next, all of them too afraid to explore the jungle themselves. But Dr. Callaway was different. He was determined to uncover the truth. "Do you ever get the feeling that we're being watched?" Maria asked, glancing nervously over her shoulder. James laughed, though his voice was strained. "The jungle's always watching, but there's nothing out here but trees and animals." Dr. Callaway, however, felt an unease settling in his chest. He had been to many parts of the world, had ventured into places few dared to go. But something about this jungle was wrong. The air was thick with tension, as if the very earth itself was holding its breath. As they pressed forward, the jungle grew darker, denser. The trees seemed to close in around them, their branches twisting like gnarled fingers reaching for the sky. The sounds of wildlife grew faint, replaced by an eerie stillness that unsettled the group. They finally stumbled upon the ruins, crumbling stone structures half swallowed by the jungle. The symbols on the walls were unlike any they had seen before, a strange mix of geometric patterns and animalistic images. Some of the symbols depicted creatures with elongated bodies and faces that seemed to distort with every glance. This isn't just a city," Maria whispered, running her fingers over the markings. "It's a warning." Dr. Callaway was already examining the remains of an altar. The Talyahai must have worshipped here. These markings are clearly religious. James, ever the skeptic, stepped forward. "Worshipped what? These things on the walls look like monsters." At that moment, A gust of wind swept through the clearing, carrying with it the unmistakable scent of decay. The temperature dropped sharply, and a strange silence fell over the group. Maria froze. "Did you hear that?" Dr. Calloway looked up, his heart racing. In the distance, just beyond the ruins, there was a shape dark, tall, and unnatural. It stood perfectly still, watching them. "Get the equipment. We need to leave," Dr. Calloway muttered, his voice tense. But before they could make a move, the shape disappeared into the trees, vanishing as quickly as it had appeared. That wasn't an animal," Maria whispered, her face pale. "Let's go," Dr. Calloway urged, his voice tight with panic. But even as they turned to leave, they felt it. A presence, something closing in around them, unseen, watching from the shadows. The whispers began. "Ethan, Maria, James. The hunt is eternal." As the group fled deeper into the jungle, the air thickened with an oppressive weight. It felt as though the forest itself was alive, shifting, waiting. The creatures that once stalked the Talyahai now turned their eyes toward these new intruders. The ancient pact had not been forgotten, and now the jungle had claimed new prey. The hunters were awake, and the hunt would begin again. The group stumbled deeper into the jungle, disoriented and terrified, with every snap of a twig sending a chill down their spines. The whispers had become louder, more urgent, like a chorus of voices beckoning them deeper into the shadows. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and the trees around them seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy. "We need to get out of here," Maria gasped, her breath coming in short bursts. But Dr. Calloway's face had gone pale. "We're already too far in. We can't outrun them." James, clutching his camera, turned to look behind them. The dark figures had returned, now visible in the distance, silent as death itself. Their forms moved with inhuman speed, their eyes glowing faintly in the thick darkness. The group was surrounded. Ethan's mind raced, recalling the markings in the ruins, the ancient symbols. He realized with horror that they weren't just a record of worship. They were a map to a deeper, forbidden part of the jungle, where the final ritual had been performed, where the bond between the jungle and the hunters had been sealed. He turned to Maria and James, his voice trembling. "We have to break the pact. We have to find the altar." But it was too late. The creatures were already closing in, their glowing eyes piercing the darkness. As the hunters emerged from the shadows, their twisted forms barely human, the group realized the terrifying truth. There was no escaping. The jungle had claimed them just as it had claimed so many before. The ancient pact could never be broken. It was woven into the very fabric of the land. With no other choice, Dr. Calloway, Maria, and James stood together, knowing the price they had to pay. As the creatures circled them, they faced their doom, the whispers growing louder, calling them into eternal darkness. The jungle had claimed its victims once again, and the cycle would repeat. New explorers would come, drawn by the whispers of the past, unaware of the ancient forces waiting in the shadows. The hunters, bound to the jungle by an unholy pact, would forever remain, hunting those who dared to trespass. And so, the Amazon would continue to thrive, its secrets hidden in the heart of darkness, where no one would ever truly understand the price of disturbing the ancient balance.